rock star is defined as rich and rich.
I think that it'll come pretty easily for me, you know, because I'm different from everyone else.
What if you don't make it as a rock star?
Oh, I will.
But what if you don't? In 10 years, what are you going to be doing?
See, I will, though, see.
What if you don't make it?
But I will. I will make it.
In 1988, documentary and film producer Penelope Spheris displayed a montage of 15 unknown wannabe rock stars from LA, all giving the same answer when asked what would you do with your life if you didn't make it as a rock star, in her film The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years. However, 30 years after the film was released, I can confidently say that I've never heard of a single one of them. The Decline of Western Civilization trilogy began in 1981 with the self-titled debut directed and produced by Penelope Spheris. It chronicles the emerging punk rock scene that was flooding LA in the late 1970s and includes a lot of live footage and interviews from bands like Circle Jerks, ex and pre-Henry Rollins Black Flag. In the film, we get the tour of then Black Flag vocalist Ron Ryer's living quarters in a hole closet at the abandoned church where the band lived. By the time the film was released, Rollins had joined the band, but at the time was still with State of Alert, also known as SOA, just like the other project that we all know this guy from.
Fair is for losers. I'd rather win.
You will also find the very young and inexpert Pat Smear, who would go on to be a session player with Nirvana and later on a Foo Fighter. Pat can be seen playing live with the Germs between shots of Germs vocalist Darby Crash and his girlfriend recounting the harrowing tale of how they discovered a dead body in their backyard in the most boring way possible.
Darby and Donnie and Dinky take the trash out at like 1 in the morning. It was on a Tuesday, the Friday before. I just went, what? This guy's dead, and I gave him a kick in the stomach, you know, and he was dead.
Pat also throws in during an interview that I punched.
I've probably punched out everybody I know at one time or another, but I've always ran afterwards.
Fun fact. The Germs lineup also briefly included Belinda Carlisle on drums, though Carlisle never actually played with the band due to a hefty case of mononucleosis. She stayed on as friend and helper, but left for reasons including, as she put it, I was really disturbed by the heroin use that was going on. The film also contains interviews from club owners, security and other personnel, and this kid who really likes to say fuck. If you watch all the way to the end, you get to my favourite part of the whole movie, Fear's performance of Let's Have a War. Fear frontman Lee Ving's stage presence is undeniable in this performance. After abusing the audience for what seems like half an hour in a venue they'd previously been banned from for starting a riot, they come very close to starting another one until they actually decide to play some music. They kick off with I Don't Care About You, which you might know from the Guns N' Roses cover album, The Spaghetti Incident, as the only song that Slash ever sang for Guns N' Roses. Another lineup of Fear also featured Flea on the bass before the Red Hot Chili Peppers took off. Fast forward to 1987. Punk rock has been swept aside and glam metal has taken over. The scene is now comprised of cross-dressing teens with delusions of fame and fortune, and director Penelope Spheris' 17-year-old daughter is now dating Nikki Sixx.
I like that spine-chilling feeling, that goosebumps up the spine, you know, like you really got me. Da-da-da-da-da. It's like an orgasm, you know.
The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years, is about the children of the first generation to ever experience rock and roll as a teenager, in an all-encompassing period piece about the metal scene happening on the Sunset Strip in the late 80s, during a time when parents of rebellious teens didn't understand their children's music and sought to control and suppress it.
Back in Control is an organization that is designed to show parents how to regain control of the child's behavior.
What do you want me to do, bend over?
Demettaling is a program that actually gets the kid out of heavy metal.
Penelope Spheris was a huge metal fan at the time and turned down the opportunity after being chosen to direct the 1984 mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap, because she couldn't make a mockery of the music she loved. She took Part 2 a step further by recruiting not just the club bands and wannabe rock stars for interviews, but real professionals of the field. A-listers such as Lemmy from Motorhead, Aerosmith, Poison, Alice Cooper, Ozzy Osbourne and Kiss all contribute, just as well as bands you've never heard of in your life, such as Seduce, Odin and Megadeth. Just kidding. We've all heard of Seduce. The show begins with leather-clad, crown-covered Gene Simmons explaining how the fans of metal set the genre apart from all the mediocre crap.
Half the true magic is about the fans.
As a massive fan of heavy metal, I was lucky enough to see most of these guys play over a 2-day event called Rock to Wellington when I was 18. Ozzy, Alice, Poison, Kiss, Whitesnake. It was headbang at heaven. Paul Stanley also lends an interview for the movie. He's the guy being interviewed with 3 women in his beard.
What do you think parents think about you?
Do I care?
Excessive? Yes. But is he acting? Not at all.
And we can safely say that you actually do live like this.
As often as I can.
When I think of LA glam metal, I think of Guns N' Roses, Poison and Motley Crue. Who I don't think of is Odin, the self-proclaimed answer to rock and roll's prayer. During a visit to one of the Sunset Strip's mainstay rock and roll clubs, Gazzari's, we watched London's Nadir Priest judging a rock and roll dance competition that features some very attractive women. Nadir is like a kid in a candy store and gets very vocal over his excitement for the girl with no underwear.
We have muff! We have muff!
Bill Gazzari comes on stage doing dance moves you never want to see a 60-year-old doing. He lends a bit of FaceTime to the camera also, but only says things that make him sound like the Hugh Hefner of the Sunset Strip.
I liked 18-year-old girls when I was 18. I love them now.
You can hear about Gazzari's mention in The Decline of Western Civilization Part 1.
And you think Beverly Hills is classy? They can't hold a candle to this place.
Bill Gazzari died only 3 years after Part 2 was released. Odin's mega awkward appearance happens after Gazzari wraps up the dance comp and unsuccessfully tries to start the crowd chanting the band's name. Odin, Odin, Odin. The band then comes on stage with lead singer Randy O wearing bottomless slacks. The guitarist of Odin, Jeff Duncan, says the humiliation of Decline took years to live down. After the band plays what you can call a performance, we get to meet the members in an interview, which at Penelope's suggestion happened in a hot tub surrounded by groupies. There, Randy O talks about girls, suicide, and making rock and roll history on the same level as Jim Morrison and Robert Plant.
I want it to go as big as like Zeppelin or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or like...
Duncan told The Guardian in 2015, "She gave us a bunch of beers and the cameras rolled. Even then, I was uneasy with things that were being said. When Randy said he wanted to be as big as Robert Plant or else he'd commit suicide, it was a bit much, but he had that attitude, shooting for the moon. Regardless of what we said, even as we were being filmed, we were already close to breaking up. I went to the premiere as a member of Armored Saint." Odin were no different to any other young band, only we were filmed. Odin never made it, but Randy O thankfully never killed himself. He found work driving trucks in Hollywood and, according to Jeff Duncan, seemed pretty happy about it. Penelope Spheris did a great job at getting a lot of the young hopefuls to really open up about music and life in the Strip, the same way as she did in Decline Part 1. It's this kind of hubris with the youth and her solid love of metal that earned her the director's chair for Wayne's World. Penelope hits on a number of topics pertinent to the era, such as the appeal of men wearing girls' clothing and makeup. Frankly, because the chicks dig it. Not to mention the guys who get a kick from having the girls make them up. Before the era of glam, metal was a man's game. If you think of Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden and Metallica, metal was serious. It was tough and macho. Add Lycra, lyrics about sex and partying, and piercingly high vocals, it becomes a game both sides of the fence can enjoy. and throughout the film you get a sense there's nothing most of these guys love talking about more than their dicks and their groupies.
In the 60s, they used to call them groupies, you know, so I like to call them the fleas and ticks of rock and roll.
Penelope, having grown up in trailer parks and carnivals, says a lot of the language went straight over her head at the time. But looking back, there was definitely a predatory vibe from the masculine aspect that perhaps the eyeliner and high heels did a lot to cover up. This is really highlighted in the scene when the band Faster Pussycat plays at the Cat House, a sleazy sunset strip club not unlike the one you see in the music video for Girls, 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 where the manager has no reservations about telling the camera,
You know, if you want to come here dressed really nice, that's okay, but you'll get in the club faster if you dress sleazy.
She also compares the way the guys take advantage of the girls for a meal ticket for something to eat to prostitution. Not that they really care. When you're struggling along the bones of your ass, and I'm sure we've all had those days, food is a powerful motivator. But at least it's much more sanitary than how Henry Rollins describes the way Black Flag picked up a cheap feed on the road. The band London features as a main source of comedy in this movie. If you've seen the Netflix original biopic about the rise and fall of Motley Crue, The Dirt, you might remember that scene in the diner when Tommy Lee approaches Nicky Sixx after having seen him play a show with London. Sixx was a founding member of the band, and members of the band had since included Blackie Lawless of Wasp, Izzy Stradlin and Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses. Medea the Priest jokes about how the band is a training school for rock stars.
We get somebody in the band, and as soon as they leave, they become rock stars.
It begs the question, why did the members of London not just leave their own band? The boys are all seen sitting around on their best behaviour, which is still pretty crude, but sanitising the conversation somewhat and drawing no attention at all to the fact they all had cocaine stashed under their seats. This was around the time of the PMRC, and nobody was going to stick their neck out just in case they were next on the chopping block.
Have you ever tried any illegal or illicit drugs? I was asking, have you ever used or tried any illicit drugs?
The Parents Music Resource Centre, or PMRC, was an organisation started in 1985 by then Senator Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, who led the Washington Wives into battle to condemn and contain anything deemed to be porn rock. They launched an offensive against a list of 15 songs that they called the Filthy 15, which included Twisted Sisters, We're Not Gonna Take It, and Wasp's Animal Like a Beast, and held a hearing at the Senate on September 19, 1985 to legislate that all such material be packaged and labelled to warn the purchasers. The opposing witnesses at the hearing included Frank Zappa, Dee Snider and John Denver, who was still sore about the radio blacklisting his song Rocky Mountain High for alleged drug references, and compared the PMRC proposals to Nazi book burnings. There's a fantastic movie about the PMRC here and called Warning, Parental Advisory. Dee Snider plays himself and reenacts the moment in court when he mops the floor with Al Gore.
The vehemence with which you attacked Senator Gore's wife, is that important to your testimony?
First of all, I wasn't attacking Senator Gore's wife. I was attacking a member of the PMRC. Okay, I was
Senator Gore's wife by name?
Oh, her name is Tipper Gore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't say the senator's wife. I said Tipper Gore, okay?
The original film of Snider in court from 1985 can still be found online. So we get a grand spectacle of London doing what they do best, being hilarious in the most rock and roll way imaginable.
You want to hear about Arizona? Well, I just found out when I was in my hotel room that oral sex was illegal.
Yeah, but unfortunately we did break the law an awful lot when we were in Arizona.
All band members claim that none of the stupidity was acted, but while the cameras were rolling, the priest tried to set fire to a Russian flag, not realizing it was fireproof.
Come on, motherfucker, I ain't got all day.
Then the band proceeded to blow themselves up on stage. Nearly. If we're talking about rock and roll, we should probably talk about the second part of every headbanger's credo. Drugs. We get an avalanche of information from Ozzy Osbourne as he talks about the role drugs and alcohol played when he was with Black Sabbath while making bacon and eggs for breakfast. Ozzy has admitted to using booze, coke, heroin, Quaaludes, glue, cough syrup, Rohypnol, Klonopin, and Vicodin on more than one occasion. All at the same time.
Still, I'm an alcoholic, and you always are, you know. It's,
But you feel better now.
No.
Recent genome testing of Osbourne's DNA has found a mutation that allows Ozzy to metabolize drugs in a different way to the rest of us, making him the first real-life member of the X-Men. One drug, however, remains as Ozzy's kryptonite: caffeine. You'll notice that Ozzy is not making coffee with his breakfast. He goes to pour the orange juice and almost gets it in the glass.
You know, we took LSD, we took cocaine, we took vast amounts of marijuana. It was fun at the time, but then we all just sort of thought this ain't a very good idea anymore.
So you have a more stable life now?
No.
Despite his reputation, Ozzy delivers a firm drugs are bad message, as do the Toxic Twins, Steve Tyler and Joe Perry, who was sober at the time. Alice Cooper was sober at the time. It was the late 80s and a lot of bands had cleaned up their act. Motley Crue was sober. Keith Richards was off heroin. Dave Mustaine was still using and wouldn't get clean until the following year, as would Ozzy Osbourne, after the infamous strangling incident.
No, I'm not into drugs. I think drugs suck.
They're both.
A lot of the people that Penelope interviewed for this movie were decidedly anti-drugs, which surprised me for a movie made in LA during the 80s. They say we don't need drugs to have a good time, and even you can't be a musician and a drug addict. You have to pick one. Chris Holmes gives us a prime example as a victim to the perils of rock and roll decadence in debatably the most disturbing interview of the film, where he drifts about his pool in a floaty in full leather and drowns himself in vodka while his mother sits poolside and watches in disappointment. When Penelope Spheris interviewed the Wasp guitarist Chris Holmes in his pool, she claimed to be horrified and deemed the footage unusable. Holmes is extremely drunk, can be seen drinking from 3 bottles of Smirnoff, and gives very muddled answers that go between "I'm a happy little camper" and "I don't dig being the person that I am." Penelope wanted to reshoot the interview, but the producers explained there wasn't enough money in the budget and they had to go with what they had. In his interview, Holmes labels himself a full-blown alcoholic and a piece of crap, douses himself with an open bottle of vodka, then loses his balance and falls into the pool while his mother watches on in silence. Penelope lessens the shock a little when she explains that the first half of the bottle was real, but after that he just kind of let it fill with pool water. Chris Holmes actually recreated his pool interview in 2017 under the same circumstances and answering many of the same questions, only this time he answers a little differently. He says he gave up drinking in February of 1996 after 6 DUIs. Kudos to him. Megadeth are the last to feature and deliver some of the most coherent interviews of the whole movie. Dave Mustaine gives his take on not lumping Megadeth into that satanic category like all the other metal bands that can't write about love or war or politics.
Megadeth, that's the best way to explain us because, we don't really like to be labeled anything. I think categorization is a sin because it cuts you off, it doesn't let you go any farther, you can't expand any farther.
The film shows Dave exhaling his cigarette smoke into the studio microphone before laying down a vocal track for In My Darkest Hour, and segues into a video of the band performing the song live in front of a raucous audience. Megadeth were included in the film because Penelope Spheris also wanted to show a more serious side of metal. Favourite moment? As always, Ozzy steals the show when he tells us the story of a girl who...
This girl with really long hair sits on the bar stool by the side of us, and we don't know her, and suddenly she goes bang and falls on the floor. He gets her by the legs, and I get her by the shoulders. And I got her by the shoulders, and I get so far up with her, and she starts wobbling and screaming. Oh, what's the matter with her? And I suddenly realised I had my foot on her head.
What I learned from watching the film, as someone who really puts metal from the 80s and 90s on a pedestal and gets excited to unbury whatever Extreme was doing in 1992, I realised that not all 80s glam metal is that good. Some of it just really sucked. Like the way that we hear 100 rap artists on the radio all the time, or the same overproduced synthetic pop blaring at us every day. At a point in history, the glam metal market was completely saturated just the same way, and not all of it was worth listening to. The other thing I realised, if you make a list of all the big names in this film, like Lemmy, Alice Cooper, Kiss, Aerosmith, Ozzy, Poison, Megadeth, note how many of these artists are still either prolific, making music, and or still are but probably shouldn't be touring. Almost all besides Motorhead, rest in peace Lemmy, and Seduce, who survived for 2 albums. You can go on to read their Metal Wiki page where it says, unfortunately, even though they were planning on making a 3rd album, they broke up for whatever reasons not long afterwards. But 30 years after the fact, and we're still talking about these guys and the music they made. It makes me think that what makes metal great is not just the fans, but also the longevity of the music. Alright, thanks guys, this is Jim Bartell here at Electric Island Studios. Stay metal! The scene is now comprised of cross-dressing teens. The scene is now comprised of cross-dressing teens. Cross-dressing teens. Illusions of fame and fortune. Winners with Black Sabbath while making bacon and bread.